For over a decade, the world watched quietly as Tom Cruise, one of Hollywood's most celebrated actors, seemed to drift further from his only daughter. Suri Null, once known to the world as Suri Cruise, grew up in a bubble of fame she never asked for, a life punctuated by the glare of cameras, whispers of secrecy, and expectations far beyond her years. From the earliest moments, every decision about her surroundings, her schooling, and even the simplest interactions was filtered through the lens of protection and control. High walls, private jets, carefully monitored outings. These were both sanctuary and prison, shaping a childhood that most could scarcely imagine. In public, smiles were effortless. Red carpets were conquered with poise. Yet behind the scenes, the reality was far more complex. Suri's mother, Katie Holmes, moved through this world balancing devotion and vigilance, aware that each moment carried weight. The birth of her daughter was a milestone wrapped in rituals dictated by faith and devotion. A silent birth, the monitoring of pregnancy at home, and the carefully orchestrated environment reflected Tom's intensity, his desire to protect, yet they also cast a long shadow over the early days of Suri's life. Friends and acquaintances noted the dichotomy, a child surrounded by love, yet enveloped by rules, where every smile and gesture was measured against unseen expectations. The ordinary freedoms of childhood, playing in a park, walking a neighborhood street, laughing without restraint, were replaced with structured schedules, supervised activities, and the constant awareness of being observed. Even as she grew, Suri displayed an acute awareness of the boundaries around her. Visitors and friends noticed a quiet attentiveness, an understanding that her actions were never truly private. Her mother's presence offered a protective buffer, moments of normalcy amidst a highly managed world. Creative classes, arts programs, and controlled social interactions were introduced not just for enrichment, but as pockets of independence, small islands of personal expression within a sea of structure. Suri learned early that the gaze of her father carried weight, that obedience and measured behavior were expected, and that subtle gestures could communicate as loudly as words. Meanwhile, the public perceived a family of perfection. Red carpets, glossy magazine spreads, and headline-grabbing appearances that showcased smiles and unity. The contrast between public image and private reality, however, was stark. Household staff, security, and advisors moved quietly in the background, ensuring both safety and compliance. Even casual family meals or trips to a cafe were conducted with precision, a choreography of care that sometimes felt confining rather than protective. For Suri, observation became a necessary skill. She learned to navigate interactions with subtlety, to interpret the intentions behind each gaze and gesture, and to understand the weight of legacy and expectation. Katie Holmes, balancing her own fame with the demands of her partner and the tenets of Scientology, gradually developed strategies to provide her daughter with some autonomy. These were small gestures, encouraging friendships outside the immediate sphere, allowing for creative expression, and gently nudging Suri toward experiences that reflected her individuality. While Tom remained unwavering in his beliefs and his approach to parenting, Katie's actions laid the groundwork for subtle acts of self-determination, teaching Suri that freedom could be cultivated even within the strictest boundaries. The dichotomy of Suri's early years, luxury and restriction, visibility and concealment, love and discipline, shaped the contours of her personality. Observers recalled moments of quiet resilience. A child who could sit through an interview, participate in a public event, or perform with poise, yet whose eyes hinted at awareness beyond her age. The household, though resplendent in resources, was a place where discretion and vigilance were paramount. Laughter, play, and spontaneity existed, but they were often tempered by the omnipresence of supervision. Suri learned early that personal agency required patience, observation, and subtlety. As she approached adolescence, the lessons of these early years began to solidify. She understood the delicate balance between compliance and assertion, the necessity of measured independence, and the value of observation as a tool of survival. Each birthday, school milestone, and small achievement was experienced against the backdrop of fame, parental expectation, and public scrutiny. The ability to navigate this environment with poise, while quietly cultivating autonomy, became her defining skill. By the time Suri reached her late teens, the signs of emerging independence were evident. Small acts, a decision about clothing, a choice of school projects, a subtle shift in public identity, hinted at a growing sense of self. The child once constrained by walls and rules was beginning to carve out a space of her own. Her story is not one of rebellion, but of measured assertion, of patience and resilience forged in the crucible of fame, devotion, and expectation. Every action, every choice, every quiet defiance tells a story of a young woman who has learned to navigate a complex world, to assert agency where she can, and to prepare for a life that is finally hers alone. Suri Null was born into a world that few could imagine, a life framed by fame, expectation, and the meticulous influence of her father's beliefs. Tom Cruise, already a cinematic icon with decades of blockbuster success, and Katie Holmes, a rising star from Dawson's Creek, brought her into existence amid a whirlwind romance that had captivated global attention. From her earliest days, the rhythms of Suri's life were dictated by devotion, discipline, and an awareness of the world's gaze. A silent birth, a monitored pregnancy, and the quiet enforcement of strict routines were intended as protective measures, yet they also cast shadows over her early experiences. The luxury that surrounded her, a sprawling estate, private jets, and the privileges of Hollywood life, was intertwined with boundaries invisible to outsiders, shaping a childhood at once extraordinary and constrained. Even as a toddler, Suri displayed an unusual attentiveness. She watched the adults around her, noting expressions, movements, and the subtle codes that guided her environment. Friends of Katie and Tom noticed a quiet intensity in her eyes, a depth of observation uncommon for her age. Her mother, determined to provide normalcy within the constraints of their lives, sought moments of ordinary childhood. Walks in quiet corners of the city, afternoons in art and music classes, and carefully arranged interactions with peers were attempts to cultivate independence while maintaining safety. These moments were fleeting yet formative, teaching Suri the delicate balance between compliance and autonomy. Education became another arena of negotiation. Tutors and specialized programs provided her with intellectual and creative stimulation, yet the selection of schools was filtered through considerations of privacy, security, and her father's expectations. Inside classrooms, she was attentive, absorbing more than she often revealed. Music, theater, and the arts became outlets for self-expression, spaces where she could experiment, create, and develop skills that were hers alone. Each achievement was layered with significance, a quiet testament to the resilience required to navigate a life simultaneously public and highly controlled. The household itself was a microcosm of scrutiny. Even casual activities, meals, playtime, or short trips, were orchestrated with care. Security, aides, and advisors moved subtly, blending into the background while ensuring that both protocol and faith were observed. Every gesture, every word, was weighed against unspoken standards. Observers noted that Suri learned quickly to interpret tone, posture, and glance, honing an awareness that became integral to her sense of self. She began understanding that compliance could coexist with personal insight, and that agency often required subtlety rather than overt action. Katie Holmes, while immersed in her own career, became a quiet architect of her daughter's autonomy. She introduced pockets of choice, letting Suri pick books, select school projects, or participate in creative endeavors, allowing her to explore identity within structured boundaries. These efforts, small as they seemed, provided Suri with a sense of control over aspects of her life that otherwise felt determined by others. It was a slow cultivation of independence, taught not through rebellion, but through guidance, observation, and gentle encouragement. The dichotomy of Suri's early years, freedom interwoven with constraint, visibility tempered by control, love tempered by expectation, shaped her personality in profound ways. She learned to navigate relationships with care, to assess intentions, and to act with deliberation. Even celebrations and milestones were managed with precision, the public image often masking the quiet struggles of adaptation and comprehension behind the scenes. Observers noted that her demeanor, while composed, carried the imprint of this delicate education, a poise born from early necessity and constant attention. Peers and occasional visitors to the home remarked on her perceptiveness. She could enter a room and instantly grasp unspoken dynamics, understanding the roles of those present and adapting her behavior accordingly. Laughter and play existed, yet were carefully moderated, moments of joy set against the backdrop of observation and expectation. Even seemingly trivial choices, how to sit, how to speak, which way to walk, were learned skills in subtle communication, a way of surviving and thriving within the structures imposed upon her. As Suri grew, the influence of her father's beliefs and her mother's protective guidance became more apparent. Scientology's doctrines shaped the rhythm of the household, emphasizing adherence, discipline, and hierarchical observation. Yet Katie's careful interventions ensured that Suri retained access to creativity, friendship, and experiences that allowed her spirit to grow beyond constraints. It was within these carefully curated spaces that Suri developed a sense of self, recognizing both the power and the limitations of her environment, and learning to claim agency where it was possible. The early teens marked a period of increasing awareness. Suri began to understand the contrast between the world she inhabited and that of other children. Social media, public appearances, and the relentless interest of the press created an additional layer of surveillance. Yet she learned to navigate it with grace. Small rebellions emerged in subtle ways. A choice of clothing, a shift in interests, the adoption of her mother's middle name in school performances, tiny but deliberate acts signaling the growth of her independent identity. Observers noted these changes as expressions not of defiance, but of careful self-determination, a maturation accelerated by circumstance. By the time she approached adolescence, Suri's early experiences had forged a resilience uncommon for her age. She learned patience, discretion, and strategic thinking, understanding that every choice carried weight and every action could be interpreted publicly. Yet alongside this resilience came creativity, empathy, and a capacity for observation that enabled her to engage with the world thoughtfully. Her formative years were defined by contrasts: comfort and restriction, love and discipline, visibility and privacy. Within these contradictions, she cultivated the foundation for the young woman she would become. Observant, poised, and quietly assertive, prepared to step into her own life when the time came. The tapestry of Suri's upbringing, woven from luxury, discipline, protection, and carefully guided autonomy, set the stage for the decisions she would later make as a teenager and young adult. The early years were not simply a prelude. They were a preparation, shaping her capacity to navigate complex relationships, media scrutiny, and the delicate balance between familial love and personal independence. The experiences of her childhood, the lessons of observation, resilience, and cautious self-assertion, would inform every choice she made, allowing her to gradually claim agency, voice, and identity in a world that had long sought to define her. These formative years, rich in both challenge and guidance, laid the groundwork for the story of a daughter navigating fame, devotion, and ultimately freedom. As Suri entered her early teens, the world outside continued to see a picture-perfect family. Yet the reality within was increasingly complex. Katie Holmes found herself navigating a household dictated by faith, fame, and expectation, her role as a mother entwined with the demands of a high-profile marriage. Tom Cruise, unwavering in his devotion to Scientology, approached parenting with the intensity and control that had defined his career. Every decision, from schooling to social interaction, was filtered through a lens of adherence, discipline and loyalty, leaving little room for the ordinary freedoms of adolescence. The balance between protection and suffocation became ever more delicate, a quiet tension that no public appearance could reveal. For Suri, this period was defined by observation and adaptation. She had already learned to read the subtle cues in the room, to anticipate reactions, and to navigate the invisible rules that governed her environment. Friends and acquaintances described a young girl who was quiet, deliberate, and unusually perceptive. Simple acts, how she walked, how she smiled, the tone of her voice, were measured, each movement and negotiation between personal instinct and the expectations imposed upon her. Playdates, outings, and interactions were often orchestrated, leaving her to find freedom in small, carefully chosen acts of independence, whether in creative pursuits, classroom projects, or personal hobbies. Despite these constraints, cracks began to appear in the family dynamic. Katie's growing unease with the strictures of Scientology and the intense control over their household created subtle but meaningful shifts. She sought moments of normalcy for Suri, quiet trips to Manhattan, unsupervised walks in familiar neighborhoods, and occasional encounters with old friends. These small acts of autonomy, while inconspicuous to the public, were revolutionary within the tightly controlled confines of the family home. They allowed Suri to explore aspects of her personality and independence that had been restricted, laying the groundwork for her eventual assertion of identity. The public, however, remained unaware of these undercurrents. Headlines continued to celebrate red carpets, premieres, and glamorous family moments. Yet behind closed doors, tensions grew. The presence of advisors, security personnel, and aides created a rhythm that dictated daily life, enforcing both safety and obedience. Suri, now increasingly aware of the gaze upon her, learned the intricate dance of compliance, subtly asserting herself without disrupting the carefully maintained balance. Observers noted that she had developed a keen sense of timing, understanding when to act, when to speak, and when silence would communicate more effectively than words. By the time Suri approached adolescence, whispers of change had begun circulating among insiders. Reports suggested that Katie was quietly preparing for the possibility of separation, considering not only her own autonomy, but the protection and future of her daughter. It was not an impulsive decision. Every step was meticulously planned, ensuring that Suri would remain safe and unexposed to forces that Katie perceived as potentially harmful. Friends and family recounted moments where Katie would make small but deliberate choices, altering routines, selecting specific schools, or guiding Suri's creative pursuits, each intended to cultivate independence while navigating the strictures of a controlling environment. The culmination of these tensions arrived in 2012, when Katie filed for divorce. The timing shocked the public, yet those closest to the family understood the strategic nature of the move. The decision was less about confrontation and more about protection, ensuring that Suri would grow up with freedom, education, and opportunities outside the shadow of a system that had constrained them both. Legal maneuvers were executed with precision, from the choice of jurisdiction to the careful management of media exposure. Katie's goal was clear: maintain full custody and control over Suri's upbringing, shielding her from influences she believed could threaten her autonomy and innocence. The divorce, though publicized, belied the complexity behind it. Suri's transition from Los Angeles to New York marked a profound shift in her life. No longer confined to rigid routines, she could explore creative pursuits, engage with peers, and experience a semblance of ordinary adolescence. Friends observed that the young girl began to display confidence, a quiet self-assurance previously tempered by observation and caution. Simple freedoms, walking through city streets without supervision, participating fully in school productions, and making personal choices about her appearance and activities, became milestones of independence. These small victories, while seemingly ordinary, represented a profound emancipation from a childhood dominated by external control. Tom Cruise, deeply invested in his faith and work, maintained financial and practical support, Yet the physical and emotional distance between him and Suri grew. Publicly, he rarely commented, and private interactions were limited. The contrast between the father's relentless pursuit of cinematic achievement and the daughter's emerging autonomy highlighted the emotional complexity of the family dynamic. Suri, now able to make deliberate choices, began to carve an identity separate from the shadow of fame. Yet the legacy of her early years remained present in her careful awareness, poise, and the maturity beyond her years. Throughout this period, Suri's personal growth became intertwined with subtle acts of assertion. Changes in her public identity, like adopting the name Suri Null for school and creative projects, reflected a deliberate effort to define herself beyond the parameters imposed by parental influence and celebrity. Artistic pursuits, music, theater, and the visual arts became outlets not only for expression but also for self-determination, spaces where her choices were hers alone. Observers remarked that these choices were never reckless. They were calculated, mindful, and reflective of the resilience cultivated through years of constraint. The broader narrative of Suri's adolescence is one of contrast, luxury and restriction, visibility and concealment, love and discipline. Within this duality, she developed skills in observation, empathy, and strategic self-expression. The crises and tensions of these years, navigating parental expectation, religious influence, and public scrutiny, shaped her capacity for resilience. By the end of her teenage years, Suri emerged as a young woman capable of navigating fame, familial complexity, and the subtleties of public attention with poise and confidence. The biographical arc of these years, culminating in her eventual independence, highlights the silent struggles, the quiet strategies, and the deliberate cultivation of identity that defined her adolescence. Suri Null's journey through these turbulent years is a testament to patience, observation, and the careful assertion of agency. It is a story of growth forged in the intersection of love, control, and freedom, a narrative where the outward glamour of celebrity masks the deeply human experience of a child carving a path to selfhood within the pressures of an extraordinary environment. The aftermath of the divorce reverberated through every aspect of Suri's life. Though she was freed from the tightly controlled environment of her early childhood, the consequences of living under constant observation and the weight of expectation remained. The absence of her father, both physical and emotional, created a void that no amount of privilege could fill. Even as she navigated the bustling streets of New York, attending school and exploring creative pursuits, the imprint of her early years lingered. Each smile she offered, each interaction she engaged in, carried the quiet strength forged by years of vigilance, discipline, and subtle negotiation. The world may have seen her walking hand in hand with her mother, smiling calmly for photographers, but behind those images lay a complex landscape of emotions: loss, curiosity, and the gradual reclaiming of identity. Katie Holmes, for her part, bore the consequences of her decision alongside her daughter. The act of separation, executed with precision and care, required vigilance, strategic planning, and emotional fortitude. Friends close to her noted the toll it took: sleepless nights, the weight of legal battles, and the constant negotiation between maintaining normalcy and managing public perception. Every action was calculated to ensure Suri's well-being, from school selection to daily routines, and even the timing of public appearances. The freedom gained was hard-won, and each day demanded careful attention to protect the independence they had carved out together. Tom Cruise, meanwhile, confronted a different set of consequences. The world saw an action star continuing to scale cinematic heights, performing daring stunts, and commanding attention on a global stage. Yet privately, he faced the consequences of emotional distance and fractured family ties. His devotion to faith and career left limited space for reconnection, and reports suggest that his interactions with Suri were sparse and carefully mediated. The public narrative of a heroic figure achieving professional milestones contrasted sharply with the private reality of a father grappling with separation, reduced access, and the knowledge that his child was stepping into adulthood largely outside his influence. For Suri, the separation of her parents and the newfound independence were both liberating and complex. Freedom came hand in hand with responsibility, the need to navigate personal identity amidst lingering shadows of fame, and the careful consideration of public scrutiny. Her early experiences, while constrained, had instilled in her resilience and the ability to interpret social cues, but they also left a lingering sense of caution. Every choice, from friendships to school projects, required balancing authenticity with awareness of perception. The emotional consequences of growing up in a world so intensely observed were subtle but profound, shaping her capacity for empathy, discretion, and measured self-expression. The broader social consequences were evident as well. The media, initially captivated by the glamour of the Holmes family, gradually shifted focus to the unfolding narrative of separation and independence. Tabloids speculated endlessly on custody arrangements, the influence of Scientology, and the relationship between father and daughter. Yet behind these headlines lay a deeper story rarely captured in photographs or quotes. A child and mother negotiating freedom, security, and identity in a world where every action could be misinterpreted. Friends, educators, and mentors observed Suri's growth with admiration, noting her calm composure, creative engagement, and the subtle but unmistakable assertion of her own voice. Psychologically, the transition required careful adaptation. Suri had to reconcile the duality of her upbringing, the luxury and opportunity provided by fame versus the constraints and surveillance that had marked her early years. The process of establishing autonomy involved navigating both internalized expectations and external pressures. Her mother's guidance offered a blueprint for independence, emphasizing thoughtful decision-making, self-reflection, and deliberate exploration of personal interests. Music, theater, visual arts, and school activities became arenas for experimentation and self-definition, allowing Suri to reclaim elements of a childhood previously mediated by parental oversight and public scrutiny. Socially, the separation and subsequent independence reshaped Suri's interactions with peers. While previously her presence carried the weight of celebrity, she now had space to engage more naturally, forming connections based on shared interests rather than fame. Small moments, a casual conversation, participation in group projects, laughter without caution, signaled an emerging comfort with authentic interaction. These social victories, while subtle, marked significant progress in navigating a life that had been intensely managed. Each interaction reinforced her growing confidence and capacity to negotiate relationships outside the public eye. The consequences of this period extended into Suri's emerging identity. By adopting her mother's middle name in school and creative contexts, she quietly asserted independence, signaling to herself and the world that she was claiming ownership of her narrative. Each performance, project, and personal choice became an act of self-definition, a deliberate step toward autonomy. The early years of observation, vigilance, and restraint now translated into intentionality, a capacity to choose and act with foresight. The psychological and social consequences of this careful cultivation of independence underscored her resilience and the enduring impact of formative experiences. Katie's sacrifices and strategic foresight had lasting effects on both daughter and herself. By prioritizing Suri's autonomy, she navigated the delicate balance between protection and freedom, establishing structures that supported emotional well-being and personal growth. These consequences were not immediately visible, but became apparent over time in Suri's emerging confidence, composure, and creative engagement. The freedom gained through this deliberate strategy allowed mother and daughter to cultivate a shared life that, while distant from Hollywood spectacle, offered depth, stability, and a sense of real agency. For Tom, the consequences were both personal and emotional. As his daughter asserted independence and began to shape her own identity, he faced the challenge of reconciling parental love with the limits imposed by prior choices. The contrast between public admiration and private distance highlighted the cost of control and the complexity of family dynamics under extraordinary circumstances. While financial and practical support continued, the absence of consistent interaction marked a poignant consequence, a reminder that even the most powerful figures cannot dictate every aspect of a child's path. Ultimately, the period following the divorce exemplified the multifaceted consequences of fame, faith, and family dynamics. Suri's journey through adolescence, shaped by observation, restraint, and carefully guided autonomy, illustrates the psychological and social ramifications of growing up in the intersection of public fascination and private complexity. The resilience, maturity, and emerging independence she displayed are the product of both constraint and careful cultivation, a testament to the enduring impact of early life experiences, parental foresight, and the quiet assertion of agency in the face of extraordinary circumstances. These consequences, both visible and unseen, continue to shape Suri's path, reflecting the intricate interplay of love, protection, and personal freedom in a life lived under extraordinary scrutiny. Even in the midst of public scrutiny, many moments of Suri's life remained invisible, quiet instances that shaped her in ways headlines could never capture. Friends and former tutors recalled afternoons spent in small, unremarkable studios where Suri practiced piano or worked on short films, completely absorbed in her craft. The walls of these rooms, away from cameras and flashbulbs, became sanctuaries of focus and freedom. Her concentration, deliberate and unwavering, reflected a maturity cultivated through years of constrained expression. Each note she played, each line she memorized, was a subtle declaration of ownership over her own narrative, a quiet rebellion in a world that had dictated so much of her life. Katie Holmes, for her part, engaged in acts of preparation that went largely unnoticed. She meticulously planned every move, every transition, every school application, and extracurricular activity with a precision that bordered on covert operation. Friends described a woman moving silently through the public glare, often taking long walks in neighborhoods where no one would notice her, checking details, coordinating schedules, and ensuring that Suri had access to experiences that were unmediated by fame or parental oversight. These decisions, seemingly mundane to an outsider, were layered with strategic foresight. Each was a protective act, preserving both emotional well-being and the possibility of independence for her daughter. Even the smallest gestures carried significance. Choosing a quiet corner at a cafe for a conversation about school, allowing Suri to decide which creative project to pursue, or accompanying her to a rehearsal without the presence of security, all were acts of subtle empowerment. Friends who observed these moments noted a gentle but firm insistence that Suri begin to make choices for herself. The mother-daughter bond became a conduit for the transmission of autonomy, a quiet education in decision-making, self-awareness, and resilience. Each of these private acts contributed to the gradual construction of a life that Suri could claim as her own. At school, Suri began to experiment with her emerging identity. Performing in plays, directing short films, or collaborating on artistic projects, she explored aspects of her personality that had previously been constrained by parental oversight. Teachers recalled a student who approached her work with a seriousness and intensity beyond her years, yet who also demonstrated a quiet confidence and warmth that drew peers to her. These moments of engagement, largely removed from the public eye, allowed her to cultivate skills and self-assurance incrementally, without the pressure of celebrity, expectation, or external judgment. The subtle acts of independence extended beyond creativity. In social settings, Suri began to assert small freedoms, choosing which friends to interact with, deciding when to engage in public events, and learning to navigate peer relationships without interference. Each interaction, though seemingly ordinary, was layered with significance. Lessons in negotiation, observation, and personal agency, honed over years of meticulous parental guidance and careful monitoring. Observers noted that she had become adept at balancing visibility and discretion, knowing when to step forward and when to remain quiet, a skill essential for anyone growing up under extraordinary scrutiny. Even vacations, once staged for publicity, were redefined in these years. Katie sought locations and activities that offered privacy, allowing Suri to experience travel and exploration without the constant intrusion of cameras or public attention. Friends described long drives, quiet museums, and early mornings in cafes where mother and daughter could converse freely, plan creatively, and reflect. In these moments, Suri learned to articulate desires, preferences, and concerns, skills that had been difficult to practice in the earlier, more tightly controlled years of her childhood. The most telling hidden stories, however, were those moments that required emotional courage. Suri began to navigate questions about her family, her father's absence, and her faith with subtlety and thoughtfulness. She learned to hold space for her emotions, to understand complex dynamics without publicizing them, and to communicate in ways that balanced honesty with discretion. A glance at a rehearsal, a whispered conversation about school, or a pause before answering a question became acts of self-assertion. In these instances, she was not defying her past, but negotiating with it, transforming experience into agency. Friends and close observers also recounted moments where Katie allowed Suri to take small but meaningful risks, fostering resilience. Walking alone in quiet neighborhoods, attending after-school events independently, or making small logistical decisions for projects. Each choice was guided by Katie's invisible hand but ultimately claimed by Suri herself. These actions were critical in preparing her for a life beyond the shadows of her parents' fame. They demonstrated the deliberate cultivation of autonomy, a careful shaping of confidence, and a quiet assertion of selfhood that would serve as the foundation for her later decisions. Even seemingly trivial routines carried hidden significance. Choosing a new backpack, selecting a class assignment, or navigating a minor conflict with a peer became exercises in self-determination, rehearsals for the much larger challenges of adulthood. Each act, unremarked by the public, was a rehearsal in independence, a way for Suri to rehearse decision-making and judgment in a controlled, supportive environment. The accumulation of these quiet acts, repeated over months and years, created the framework for her emerging identity, resilience, and capacity for agency. In retrospect, these hidden stories reveal the quiet architecture of a childhood that was extraordinary in its constraints. Every deliberate act, from piano practice to casual walks, from creative exploration to social negotiation, contributed to a life being quietly constructed against the backdrop of fame, faith, and parental vigilance. The public may have witnessed smiles, magazine covers, and carefully curated appearances, but the substance of Suri's growth, the heart of her resilience, and the unfolding of her personal story occurred in these hidden moments. Through patience, strategy, and subtle assertion, she learned not only to survive, but to begin claiming a life that was wholly her own, laying the groundwork for the young woman she would become. Thoughtful, independent, and prepared to step into a world on her own terms. Looking back on the years that shaped Suri Null, it becomes clear that her story is as much about quiet resilience as it is about public spectacle. The world saw a child of privilege, the daughter of Tom Cruise and Katie Holmes, but the reality beneath the glimmering surface was defined by complexity, constraint, and gradual self-discovery. Each stage of her life, from early childhood under strict guidance to adolescence marked by careful assertion of independence, has contributed to a legacy built on perseverance, observation, and deliberate choice. This is a story not of rebellion, but of transformation, where every small decision reflects a conscious negotiation between inherited circumstance and personal agency. Suri's journey illustrates the tension between freedom and expectation, autonomy and obligation, love and oversight. From the earliest years, her life was guided by devotion that carried a heavy hand. Her father's faith, career, and public persona created a world where protection and control were intertwined. Yet within this framework, Katie Holmes nurtured spaces where Suri could explore identity, cultivate creativity, and develop judgment. These dual forces, strictness and liberation, shaped a young woman capable of navigating the intricacies of celebrity, privacy, and selfhood with remarkable poise. The contrast between public perception and private experience underscores a central theme of her life. What is visible is rarely the whole story, and strength often grows in silence. The legacy of these experiences is evident in the person Suri has become. Her adoption of her mother's middle name, engagement in creative endeavors, and measured assertion of independence reflect not only personal choice, but the culmination of years of careful guidance and observation. Each act of self-determination represents a conscious step toward defining her own identity, separate from the celebrity narrative imposed upon her. In this, her story resonates with universal truths about growth. Resilience is often forged through constraint, and autonomy emerges not from rebellion alone, but from deliberate, thoughtful action. Katie Holmes' role in this legacy is equally profound. Her efforts to shield her daughter from the pressures of fame, to create pockets of normalcy within a structured and demanding environment, demonstrate a quiet, strategic strength. These interventions, small acts of autonomy, careful educational choices, and protective guidance, have allowed Suri to cultivate confidence, creativity, and self-possession. Katie's decisions reflect a deep understanding that true love involves both protection and the cultivation of independence, and that the greatest legacy a parent can leave is the ability for a child to navigate the world with awareness, judgment, and resilience. The broader implications of their story extend beyond personal triumph. In a world captivated by celebrity, the narrative of Suri's life challenges assumptions about privilege and ease. Her experiences reveal the hidden costs of fame, the subtle ways in which control and devotion intersect, and the importance of thoughtful guidance in shaping identity. The legacy is not merely one of wealth or visibility, but of the lessons embedded in navigating complexity, balancing love and discipline, and cultivating agency in circumstances that could easily overwhelm a young mind. Suri's emerging adulthood illustrates the fruition of this legacy. Her confidence, composure, and engagement with creative and educational pursuits demonstrate a person who has internalized the lessons of observation, patience, and discretion. She approaches life with a clarity shaped by years of careful management and subtle assertion. Each choice she makes is informed by an awareness of consequence, a reflection of the structured upbringing she experienced, and a deliberate embrace of independence. In this, she embodies the tension and resolution that define her life, a synthesis of inherited circumstance and self-determined action. Reflection on these years also reveals the interplay of light and shadow in Suri's story. The glamour of Hollywood, the privileges of wealth and notoriety, and the extraordinary opportunities afforded by her parents' fame stand in stark contrast to the limitations imposed on her freedom, the scrutiny of the public eye, and the emotional distance created by a father consumed by career and faith. Within these contradictions, resilience emerges, identity solidifies, and lessons are internalized. The dualities, visibility and privacy, control and freedom, devotion and autonomy, become defining motifs of her legacy. Ultimately, the reflection on Suri's journey emphasizes a profound human truth. The measures we take to navigate complex circumstances, the patience required to cultivate independence, and the courage needed to assert identity quietly can shape a life of significance and strength. Her story is not defined by rebellion or spectacle, but by the thoughtful, deliberate pursuit of agency in a world that has always demanded attention. The legacy she inherits and continues to build is both a product of the extraordinary circumstances of her upbringing and the careful, quiet cultivation of her own path. It is a testament to the enduring impact of early guidance, the strength of maternal intervention, and the subtle power of self-determination. In the end, Suri's life offers a mirror to broader truths about growth and resilience. Her experiences remind us that challenges, constraints, and scrutiny, when met with observation, thoughtfulness, and perseverance, can foster the development of character, independence, and strength. The story is a reflection on what it means to emerge from complexity into agency, to claim identity in the face of expectation, and to honor both inherited legacy and personal choice. In Suri Null, we see a young woman whose life is shaped by love, challenge, and deliberate assertion, a legacy of quiet power, resilience, and self-determined identity. The story of Suri Null reaches a point where the extraordinary and the ordinary intersect, where fame and privacy, legacy and autonomy, coexist in tension and resolution. The young woman who once navigated a world of intense scrutiny now moves through her life with quiet confidence, asserting her choices and identity in ways both subtle and profound. The public may notice her presence at school performances, creative projects, or casual outings, yet the true journey of self-discovery, resilience, and reclamation has been largely invisible, unfolding in moments unobserved by cameras, headlines, or the global audience. It is in these private experiences that the essence of her story resides. The triumph of agency over circumstance, the cultivation of identity amidst constraint, and the emergence of strength shaped by love and challenge. Katie Holmes' role in this final chapter cannot be overstated. Her unwavering commitment to protecting her daughter, guiding her through a world structured by control and expectation, and creating spaces for authentic growth has left an indelible mark. From the early days of meticulous scheduling and creative encouragement to the careful orchestration of independence following the divorce, Katie's interventions provided the scaffolding upon which Suri could build her own life. The legacy of these efforts is evident in the young woman's composure, decision-making, and subtle but unmistakable assertion of self. Katie's actions serve as a testament to the quiet power of maternal guidance, strategic patience, and a deliberate cultivation of agency in the face of extraordinary circumstances. For Tom Cruise, the conclusion is nuanced and deeply human. The distance that has grown between father and daughter is both a consequence of circumstance and a reflection of choices made in the pursuit of devotion, career, and faith. While financial and practical support continues, the emotional and physical space that separates them underscores a central theme of the narrative. Even the most influential individuals cannot fully control the trajectories of those they love. Tom's cinematic achievements, daring stunts, and public acclaim contrast sharply with the private reality of familial separation and the limits of influence. The story serves as a reminder that legacy is measured not solely in fame or accomplishment, but in the connections maintained, nurtured, and honored across generations. Suri's journey highlights the delicate balance between inherited circumstances and self-determined identity. Every choice she has made, adopting her mother's middle name, engaging in creative projects, pursuing education, and cultivating friendships outside the celebrity sphere, reflects a careful negotiation with her past and a deliberate step toward autonomy. The narrative illustrates that true independence is rarely immediate. It is the result of cumulative decisions, subtle acts of courage, and the patient assertion of agency cultivated over years. Each seemingly small moment, a rehearsal, a walk in a quiet neighborhood, a conversation with a trusted friend, has contributed to the emergence of a young woman who now navigates the world on her own terms. The emotional resonance of this story is heightened by the contrasts inherent in Suri's experience. The juxtaposition of privilege and constraint, visibility and privacy, love and oversight, creates a tension that defines her adolescence and early adulthood. These dualities have forged resilience, strategic awareness, and the ability to make choices grounded in reflection rather than impulse. Suri's capacity to navigate these complexities speaks to a broader truth about human development. That strength often arises in response to limitation, and that personal agency is cultivated through the conscious negotiation of circumstance, rather than through unrestrained freedom alone. Reflection on these years offers insights not only into the lives of those directly involved, but also into the dynamics of celebrity, family, and personal growth. The narrative demonstrates that fame and fortune cannot substitute for guidance, protection, and thoughtful cultivation of autonomy. It underscores the importance of observation, patience, and strategic intervention in shaping identity and resilience. The legacy left by these formative experiences is evident in Suri's confidence, composure, and measured approach to the world, qualities that will continue to inform her decisions, relationships, and contributions as she moves further into adulthood. As Suri continues to define her path, the story remains unfinished, a living testament to growth, resilience, and quiet triumph. The lessons extend beyond the realm of celebrity. They speak to the power of deliberate choice, the necessity of cultivating autonomy, and the enduring impact of parental guidance when combined with trust and patience. The narrative invites reflection on what it means to emerge from complexity into agency, to claim identity in the face of expectation, and to honor both inherited circumstances and personal desire. Ultimately, the conclusion of Suri Null's story is not a neatly wrapped ending, but an open horizon. It is defined by freedom gained, identity claimed, and the measured assertion of self against a backdrop of extraordinary circumstances. The quiet victories, the deliberate acts of independence, and the subtle triumphs of character serve as enduring lessons for both those who observe from afar and those who experience the pressures of a highly scrutinized life. In the interplay of light and shadow, constraint and choice, Suri has begun to write the next chapters of her life. Chapters that are wholly her own, informed by the past, but not bound by it, a testament to resilience, courage, and the pursuit of authentic agency.